On the 19th of October 1973, English rock band The Who released their sixth studio album entitled Quadrophenia. Written as a rock opera, it aimed to relink the band with its roots, being in West London with the local mod audience. It did this by telling a narrative focusing on Jimmy, a fictional youngster from London who, disillusioned with his parents and his dull job, is completely immersed in the mod lifestyle, which almost serves as an outlet for him to vent his teenage angst. It was later adapted into a film of the same name, which was released on the 2nd of November 1979. The film is set in London in 1964, a time where many working-class youths were aligning themselves with one of two subcultures, the mods and the rockers. The mods wore sharp suits and often parkas, listened to soul, rhythm and blues, ska and jazz, took amphetamines and rode scooters such as Vespas or Lambrettas. Contrastingly, the rockers rode British motorbikes such as Triumphs, wore black leather jackets and listened to 1950s rock and roll. The film starts with Jimmy, a young mod, riding home on his decked-out scooter after having an appointment with a shrink. The song, The Real Me by The Who, plays in the background, which is reflective of Jimmy's attitude. He feels that being a mod is what makes him himself, and it forms the fabric of his identity. Additionally, we are very quickly introduced to the conflict with the rockers, which is shown when Jimmy is tailed by a group of them who briefly antagonise him before taking over. Later that same night, after returning home from a local dance club/bar, he pins a newspaper article to his wall documenting a conflict between the mods and rockers which he desires to be a part of. Jimmy later comes across Kev, an old friend of his who he meets in a bathhouse. He later meets up with him in a local pie and mash shop, and to his surprise, Kev is a rocker. Jim catches up with him momentarily, but suddenly decides to leave when two familiar mods walk in. It is the pressure to maintain the rivalry with the rockers which causes Jim to leave. He knows that if he is to be seen hanging out with a rocker, he could be ostracised from the subculture and lifestyle which he aligns with and values so deeply. Later on in the film, Kev comes over to Jimmy's house late one night and offers to help him fix his scooter. Kev expresses how he feels that underneath, mods and rockers are the same. Jim doesn't seem to accept this viewpoint and says that he doesn't want to be the same as everybody else, and that's why he's a mod. This is ironic, considering the fact that he has chosen to align with a subculture where everybody dresses in a similar way. Besides, he clearly idolises other mods such as Ace, who is considered as a face, which is essentially a mod who is considered to have high status and who dresses the best. Furthermore, his bedroom walls are seen to be covered in images of the members of The Who he clearly has a fondness for. Later on, one of Jim's mod friends called Spider gets attacked by a group of rockers, which prompts Jim and his other friends to get revenge. They go after a couple of random rockers in the street and begin beating them up. Jim is horrified when, out of desperation, Kev, who now has a bloody nose, calls out to him from amongst the chaos. Jim, now conflicted, has to choose between saving Kev or keeping his status within the mod subculture. Ultimately, Jim attempts to save Kev by telling his friends to leave him alone, but to no avail. He doesn't want to come to a decision and so drives off home. That's the last time we see Kev in the film. Jim, accompanied by two other mod friends, Chalky and Dave, goes around looking for some drugs that they can take with them to Brighton, where they plan to go at the weekend, just like hundreds of other mods. On the way to Brighton, Chalky gets knocked off his bike by a group of rockers, which then later serves as motivation for violence and chaos to ensue. Once they arrive in Brighton, Chalky spots the rockers who knocked him off his bike outside an ice cream parlour, and so he and loads of other mods storm the place, throwing punches and furniture. The fighting spills out onto the streets and the beach, and the police are called to the scene in an attempt to control the crowds of violent, persistent youngsters. Jim manages to temporarily escape with his girlfriend Steph, long enough for them to have an intimate encounter in an alleyway before taking to the streets again. For Jim, though, this really is a high point for him. The violence towards the rockers, the sense of overwhelming belonging to the mods, and he's with a girl that he has meaningful feelings for. He's clearly enjoying himself. It all comes crashing down, however, when Jim gets dragged into a police van and taken off to court with many other youths, mods and rockers alike. When he finally returns home, he comes to find that things are completely different. Not only does his mother kick him out after finding out that he was part of the riots in Brighton, but his friends have all moved on. They all went back to their jobs, and worst of all for Jimmy, Dave is now with Steph. This eventually leads to Jim having an outburst and attacking Dave, and he loses his friends. Prior to this, he also decided to quit his job after deciding that he no longer wants to tolerate following orders. He later sees Steph in the street and tries desperately to reconcile with her, but only to find out that their relationship was only temporary. To Jim, this relationship meant the world, but to Steph, it was all just a bit of fun, as was the weekend in Brighton. After his scooter gets crushed in a collision with a postman's van, he decides to take the train down to Brighton, perhaps in an attempt to recapture how he felt during his previous visit. He goes to the cafe where he once spent time with his group of fellow mods, only to find that it is empty and quiet. He revisits the alleyway that he went to with Steph to mourn over what once was. He later comes across a fully decked out mod scooter which seemingly sparks in him a sense of hope. He then spots Ace, one of the faces that he had long aspired to be like, only now he's a bellboy. The song Bellboy by The Who plays in the background as Jim looks on at his once idol who is keeping his lip buttoned down and running at someone's heels. Jim is frustrated. Now he has to accept that to function in society he needs to move on like everyone else. He steals Ace's scooter and drives to Beachy Head, riding close to the cliff edge. Finally, Jimmy drives the scooter off the cliff and walks away. The image of the mod scooter crashing down to a rocky peril signifies how Jimmy is pushing the mod subculture away and keeping it beyond reach. Jimmy is leaving the past behind, leaving his once fulfilling lifestyle behind. Undoubtedly, Quadrophenia remains a favourite of mine. It paints a picture of what it was like being a teenager in 1960s London and provides an insight into the culture of the time. Despite being set in 1964, however, Quadrophenia remains timeless in a sense. The angst felt and expressed by Jim after his whole world comes crashing down on him is something that people today can still relate to. The feeling of anxiety and dread surrounding the human condition and the state of the world still remains relevant. Overall, Quadrophenia is every bit as fun, occasionally ugly and upsetting as the heady days of discovering early independence and finding a direction in life can be. Whilst being quintessentially British, it remains irrefutably universal.